As you probably know, Monday afternoon saw NASA's unmanned spacecraft InSight lander touch down on Mars with a mission to probe the planet to learn about its interior. Of course, one of the major hopes is that this will allow us to search for signs of ancient life forms on Mars, or even evidence of living Martians, most likely in the form of bacteria rather than ET. The excitement of this landing has prompted a circulation of some incredible photographs from the Mars surface, including some of us, of Earth, as seen from Mars. As we can imagine, because we know what Mars looks like from Earth, in these photographs, Earth is no more than a tiny speck in the distance, no bigger or more impressive in the sky than any other heavenly body. And looking at us the way we look from Mars, the planet that is at times our closest neighbor, we must be reminded, I think, that our perspective about our place in the universe is just that, our perspective. Our purpose and role, our position and temporal location, where we are in the course of our long sojourn as earthlings in the universe is absolutely unknowable to us, as evidenced by the reflection of ourselves we see from 140 million miles away. This meditation on perspective is inspired not just by the Mars landing, but also by this week's Parsha, Vayeshev. The Torah portion begins with words that we've heard. Now Jacob was settled in the land where his father had sojourned, the land of Canaan. Vayeshev Yaakov be'eretz migurei aviv be'eretz Canaan. The first sentence with its word Vayeshev, settled, gives the impression, if we imagine it, settled, of a man comfortably seated in a rocking chair on a front porch, a man resting from a long journey, a man content to watch the sunset and his children play. The Rabbi seize on this idea of a settledness as a conveyance of Jacob's naivety, his misunderstanding of the moment in his life that he's in. He believes that the major trials of his life, his struggle with Esau, his manipulation by Laban, the seeking of the wife that he wanted, and the re-confronting of his brother, all those trials that were the worst of his life are over, that his biggest tests are behind him, that he is somehow at the end of something. But of course, we students of Torah, we know better. For in the very next sentence, the Torah tells us of Joseph, Jacob's favorite son, whose personal hubris as well as his father's affections ignite his brother's anger and jealousy and results in an act of violence so egregious between brothers that it's arguably the source of the greatest pain of Jacob's life. Jacob is not settled, the rabbis chide. It is only natural, they write, that Jacob would try to sketch a personal narrative for himself in which there is a beginning, a middle, and an end, in which there is a culmination, in which there are epic journeys and homecomings that form the mountains and valleys of his life's landscape. It is only natural that he would hope to find a quiet moment of settledness in his old age. It's simply that he is completely wrong. He lacks the perspective from which our sages and we benefit, the perspective to know that Jacob is actually in the middle of his story, not the end of it. He lacks the perspective to know that his sojourn away from Canaan and back again is only a tiny part of the sojourn of his people, rather than the final chapter, that they will spend hundreds of years enslaved in Egypt, that his settledness in the land God promised him is only temporary, a moment's pause before another long part of the journey. We learn from this that Jacob cannot possibly know the meaning of the time in which he lives. He cannot know all the consequences of his actions. He cannot know what the future holds. He cannot know, and neither can any human being. I'm reminded of the inherently human lack of perspective that each individual person has every time I'm privileged to walk through the halls of the National Civil Rights Museum In each and every successive exhibit in the museum, the seeds sown by the people in the previous room are bearing fruit that they never lived to see. An example: the spirituals sung by slaves working in the fields, an outlet for their prayers for an end of their suffering, and the secret language through which to communicate hopes and even plans to escape from bondage, are the seeds of an African American musical tradition that has transformed the world, including songs that served as, in the words of Martin Luther King, the soul of the civil rights movement. Singing was a key convening mechanism for the movement, a vehicle to build strength and resilience, and a source of power that the enslaved ancestors of many of the activists could never have imagined. But nonetheless, that humble and glorious singing was a part of altering the course of history. The recognition invited by this week's Torah portion that however badly we may feel the need to make a neat and tidy story out of our lives, when we do so, we will almost definitely be factually wrong and personally shocked, as Jacob is precisely unsettling. The unpredictability of life is disconcerting, and it can be a source of overwhelming anxiety at times. The Torah conveys this in its vivid description of Jacob's anguish upon realizing that he must withstand even more pain in his life upon losing Joseph. But the truth about our inevitable lack of perspective can also be reassuring, especially in our hardest moments. It means that our limited understanding of the moment we're in does not actually define the moment we're in. That there are forces at work in the world which may render aspects of our human experience extremely meaningful and powerful in the future, as transformative as a bit of oil that lasts for 8 days. It means that we are each a shamash of sorts, even when we can't see the other candles with whom we're sharing light. Judaism uses this human lack of perspective actually as inspiration for a way of life that is filled with constant self-reflection at times like Yom Kippur and Passover and a weekly Sabbath, a fierce commitment to presence at holy moments like lighting Hanukkah candles or seeing a rainbow or witnessing a 100th birthday, and also a life of faith. Faith that we are each letters in a scroll of a story, footprints on a map of a great sojourn, and that our task is to walk with integrity and hope always, even when we don't know exactly where we are. And sometimes, if we're lucky, we'll catch a glimpse of ourselves from far away and get to see, just for a moment, the inconceivable humility and grandeur that defines our human existence. Shabbat Shalom.